Chapter 14 of the Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan. The Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge by Herbert Carter. Chapter 14. The Return of the Eighth Scout. "He's gone!" exclaimed Bumpus, and it would be hard to tell whether relief or regret lay back of his words. For some of the boys, forgetting the peril that might hang over the head of Bob White, did the Moonshiner know of his presence and his mission to the Blue Ridge, only considered the entertainment afforded by having old Phin at their fire. "And I guess the old feller's good enough information in his head to last him a long spell," remarked Giraffe. "Hey, perhaps he's seriously considering starting a troop of Boy Scouts here in the Blue Ridge country," suggested Step Hen, who sometimes did have brilliant flashes through his brain. There was considerable amount of laughter at this proposition, which struck the boys as about as absurd as anything they had heard for a long time. "Wonder how our real scoutmaster, Dr. Philander Hobbs, would like to take the job," chuckled Davy Jones. "He thought he had trouble enough on his hands when he ran up against a few hard cases like Giraffe and Step Hen here, but they'd just be pie alongside the strapping mountain kids we've seen." "Well," remarked Thad, "you can never tell what might happen. Even those boys have got something in them that can be brought out, if only one knows how to get about it. Don't you forget, fellers, that some of the greatest men in this country has ever known were born among the mountains. And right now there might be a future president of the United States within 10 miles of where we sit." "Hear, hear!" cried Step Hen, pretending to clap his hands in applause. "Huh! Nearer than that, maybe," declared Bumpus, mysteriously swelling out his chest, and looking every inch the hero. "How would the name of Cornelius Jasper Hawtree sound to you? We've never had a President Hawtree, but there ain't no reason why we never will. Tell me that." "Give it up," sang out Davy Jones. "Anyhow, it sounded more distinguished than plain Jones," retorted Bumpus. "My name isn't plain Jones. It's David Alexander Constantine Joseph, and a few more that, to tell the truth, I've forgot." Thad and Allan drew apart from all this mimic warfare in which the fun-loving scouts liked to indulge from time to time. "Then did you talk with Bob?" asked the former, with some of the eagerness in his voice. "Yes," replied Allan. "It was great fun, too. Waited a little while before I could get the first answer to my waving, but in the end I saw a flash, like a match had been struck, and then we got in touch." "Well, what did Bob have to tell?" asked the patrol leader. "He met his little cousin, all right, just as they had arranged," Allan went on to say, "and she must have told him something that has made our chum wild with delight, for he says the trip paid him 20 times over. Just what it was he didn't tell me, saying he would have to wait till he got to camp." "Well, we can give a pretty good guess what it must be," Thad observed. "You mean that Bertha had looked and made a discovery among the papers in her guardian's safe? Is that it, Thad?" "Just about, but we'll have to quit guessing, and just wait till he comes in," says the scoutmaster, who knew just how to take a grip upon himself and appear patient, where some of the other boys would have fretted and worried greatly. "He ought to be marching in about an hour or so, at most," suggested Allan. "Not unless something happens to him, which we hope it won't," replied Thad. "You don't think now, do you," demanded the other, "that old Phin might take a notion to waylay him, just to have a look at the eighth scout?" "I thought of that, but made up my mind that so far the Moonshiner can have no suspicions who Bob is. And that being the case, Allan, you can see he would be apt to bother himself to lie in wait for him. I hope not, anyhow. It sure upset some of the plans we're trying so hard to fix, and it might spell trouble with the big T for Bob." "He's a good fellow, all right," remarked Allan, not in the least jealous because his particular chum seemed drawn more than ever toward the Southern boy. "That's right," answered Thad quickly. "We just got to stand back of him, no matter what. I guess that if some of the boys' parents had even a suspicion that we'd run up against such a combination as this, they wouldn't have given their consent so easily for our coming." "I suppose that would have been the case with Bumpus and several others," the Maine boy went on. "But I tell you, I've seen so much of this sort of thing up in the pine woods that it isn't new to me. Not that it doesn't give me a thrill, all right, whenever I think of what we're doing here, and how we had the man sitting right at our fire, the worst moonshiner of the whole Blue Ridge, I guess. And Thad, you did give him a treat the way you talked. I could see that he took considerable stock in all you said. And you opened his eyes some, believe me, with all the wonderful things you reeled off." "Wonderful to him, Allan, but the plain everyday truth to the rest of us. But I've always heard that there is a spark of good even in the worst man living. And perhaps his weakness for boys may be the soft spot in the old Phin Dady moonshiner's heart." They presently went back to the others, and joined in the general conversation, which, quite naturally, was pretty much confined to the visit of the moonshiner, what he had spoken about, his suspicions, and above all the strange interest that he had taken in Thad's account of the Boy Scout movement. "Hello there," said the voice, and they saw Bob White stalk into camp. One look at the face of the Southern boy told Thad that he had indeed made a profitable trip, for he saw a smile there, such as he seldom seen in the past. They quickly made room for him by the fire, while several of the boys scouted around to make sure that no spies lurked in the undergrowth, listening to all that was said. The fire crackled merrily and looked very cheerful, as the ring of faces turned inquiringly toward Bob White. He knew they were anxious to hear what he had accomplished, and as there were no longer any secrets to be kept from the balance of the patrol, all had been taken into his confidence. The Southern boy hesitated no longer. "I found no trouble getting across the valley," he began, "though once I had to lie low when two men passed by. From what I heard them say, I knew they were some sort of moonshiners, and that they had been ordered to take up positions somewhere and stand guard. They seemed to be all at sea about the nature of the danger, and yet, when old Phin gave the alarm, they knew what to do." "We ought to tell you right at the start, Bob," said Thad, "that we had Phin Dady sitting right where you are now, and that he stayed more than a full hour in camp." "Yes," broke in Bumpus, and filling up the stuff Thad gave him, all about the heaps of things Boy Scouts are supposed to do. "He liked it, too, sure as you live, old Phin did, and we reckon he's got a sneaking notion of starting a troop right here some fine day." Bob White appeared to be astonished, and demanded to hear the whole story before he went on with his own experience. This was presently told, and the one who had been absent at the time looked thoughtful when he heard the conclusion. "May work good for him, who knows?" he remarked, as though speaking to himself. "He's a strange man, old Phin. A hard case in most ways, but perhaps now he's got a soft spot in his flinty old heart for boys. He's got a daughter of his own, but no sons, and that kind of man generally takes to boys best." "If they do, it's because they don't know what boys are like," suggested Bumpus. "Now go on, and tell us what you did," observed Thad. "Was your cousin at the place you told her about?" "Yes, it was a little arbor in the garden that I knew well," remarked Bob, tenderly. "She was right glad to see me again, and while she wouldn't tell me all I wanted to know, I'm mighty sure Reuben Sparks is cruel to her. She hasn't been anything but happy, and always dreaming of the time when I'd come back to see her and take her to my mother." "Did she do what you asked of her?" asked Thad, seeing that Bob was apt to lose the thread of his narrative, and letting his thoughts stray back to his meeting with little Bertha, whom he loved like a sister. "She did. Took a chance to peep through some of the papers in the safe of Mr. Sparks, and believe me, she gave a shock when she said there was one hidden in a little compartment that seemed to be signed by her own father. I asked her some more questions, and I'm almost sure that it's a will which Reuben Sparks kept hidden away, but which something or other had prevented him from destroying these 4 years and more since my uncle died. If you only could get that in your hands, and it turned out to be all you think, seems to me you might do about what you wanted with old Reuben," Thad remarked. "Give it another day, and good luck, and I surely expect to have the same in my possession. Then I can shape my plans. but one thing is sure, my cousins will go back to Cranford with me." And Bob smote the palm of his left hand with his double right fist, to emphasize his remark. No one seemed to be particularly sleepy. Indeed, they had never been more wide awake in their lives. Even Davy Jones, filled with a spirit of mischief that seemed to take possession of him every once in so often, climbed the tree under which they had built their camp fire, and swung himself from limb to limb, now with his hands, but just frequently by his toes, as though he wanted to prove the truth of what that learned professor by the name of Darwin always declared, that we were descendants from a race of monkeys. The rest were lying around in the most comfortable attitudes they could find. "Come down out of there, Davy. You make me tired with your everlasting pranks. Take a drop, wouldn't you, please?" called out Bumpus. Hardly had he spoken, than there was a whoop, and Davy landed square in the middle of the now smoldering fire, sending the brands to the right and to the left in a hurricane of sparks. 7 scouts threw themselves backward to avoid contact with the scattered red embers, while Davy scrambled out of his fiery bed with a fierce alacrity. End of chapter 14. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan.